Welcome to Day 3 of Sacred Worth, Finding Identity in Perfect Love. In our first 2 days, we discovered our identity as God's children and explored how perfect love casts out fear. Today, we'll dive into understanding our identity in grace. Our key scripture is Ephesians 2:8-9, which tells us that, "By grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God." Think about the last time you received a truly meaningful gift. Maybe it was something you really wanted but could never afford, or something so thoughtful it brought tears to your eyes. The person giving it to you didn't expect anything in return. They just wanted you to have it. That's a glimpse of what grace looks like, but God's grace goes even deeper. Grace is like an infinite credit card where someone else already paid the bill. No matter how much you spend, you'll never go into debt. But unlike a credit card, grace isn't about money. It's about acceptance, love, and worth. Many of us have grown up thinking we need to earn everything good in our lives. We believe we need to be good enough to deserve love, success, or happiness. But grace flips this idea completely upside down. Imagine you're at a feast where everything is already paid for. You don't have to prove you deserve to eat. You don't have to show your worth to get a seat at the table. You don't even have to promise to return the favor. You just get to come, eat, and enjoy. That's what grace does. It sets a feast of God's love before us and says, "Come, this is all for you. No earning required." Let's talk about something many of us struggle with, the performance trap. You know that feeling when you're constantly trying to prove yourself? Maybe you feel like you need to be the perfect student, the perfect child, the perfect friend. Maybe you have an internal scorecard where you're always adding up your good deeds and bad deeds, trying to stay in the positive. Performance thinking is like trying to fill a bucket with holes in it. No matter how much water you pour in, how many achievements you rack up, how many good deeds you do, it keeps draining out. Why? Because performance can never give us what only grace can provide: unconditional acceptance. Think about a small child learning to walk. When they fall down, and they will fall down many times, do their parents love them any less? Do they have to earn back their place in the family? Of course not. The parents cheer them on, help them up, and celebrate every wobbly step. That's how God sees you through grace, not as a performer who needs to earn approval, but as a beloved child who's learning and growing. This is where true identity begins to form, not in what we do, but in what's already been done for us. Grace tells us we are loved, accepted, and valuable, not because of our performance, but because of God's character. It's like being born into royalty. You don't earn your royal status, you're born into it. Through grace, you've been born into God's family. So how do we actually live in this grace? How do we step out of the performance mindset and into grace identity? Let's make it practical with some real-life applications. First, start noticing your internal dialogue. When something goes wrong, what's your first thought? If it's, "I need to make up for this," or "I've blown it now," that's performance thinking. Grace thinking says, "I can bring this to God exactly as it is. His love for me hasn't changed." Think of grace like a new pair of glasses. When you first put them on, everything looks different. It might even feel strange or uncomfortable at first. But as you keep wearing them, you start to see everything more clearly. Living in grace means looking at yourself through God's eyes of love, acceptance, and delight. Here's a practical way to practice grace thinking. When you catch yourself in performance mode, maybe beating yourself up over a mistake or trying to prove your worth, pause and ask these 3 questions. What would I say to a friend in this situation? How would a loving parent respond to their child right now? What does God's grace say about this moment? Usually, we're much more gracious with others than we are with ourselves. By asking these questions, we begin to extend to ourselves the same grace we readily give to others. Let's end today with a powerful exercise in receiving grace. Find a quiet space and get comfortable. We're going to do something called a grace inventory. Take out a piece of paper and write down 3 columns. Where I feel I need to perform. What grace says. My new identity statement. In the first column, write down areas where you feel pressure to perform or prove yourself. Be honest. This is between you and God. In the second column, write what grace says about each of these areas. For example, performance pressure. I need to be perfect to be loved. Grace says, you are loved completely, exactly as you are. In the third column, write a new identity statement based on grace. For example, I am loved not for what I do, but for who I am, God's child. Take this grace inventory with you today. When performance thinking tries to creep in, let grace remind you of your true identity. Tomorrow, we'll explore more about living in the freedom of God's love. Until then, remember, you are completely loved, fully accepted, and perfectly valued in God's grace. Today, we'll declare powerful truths about our identity in grace. These aren't just aspirational statements. They're eternal realities of who you are because of God's unmerited favor. Let these truths wash over you like gentle, cleansing rain. Find a comfortable position and take 3 deep breaths. As I speak each truth, allow it to saturate your heart. You can repeat them silently or softly aloud. I am completely accepted not because of what I do, but because of who God is. God's grace covers my mistakes, my weaknesses, and my struggles. I don't earn God's love through performance. I receive it through grace. My failures don't define me. God's grace does. God's grace toward me is limitless, like stars filling the night sky. Now, I invite you to consider, where have you been trying to earn what God freely gives? Which area of your life needs grace's gentle touch today? Take a moment to identify that area, and then simply open your hands as a symbol of receiving God's grace there. No striving, no earning, just receiving. Let's make these truths practical for your daily life. Here are 3 ways to live in the reality of grace. When you feel like you've failed, declare, my identity is based on God's grace, not my performance. When you're tempted to earn approval, remember, I'm already fully accepted and loved by God. When shame speaks to you, respond with, God's grace is greater than my mistakes. Let's speak one final declaration together. Take a deep breath, and with gratitude, declare, I am a recipient of God's abundant grace. I live not from a place of striving, but from a place of receiving. Remember, grace isn't something you achieve, it's something you receive. Let that truth transform how you see yourself today.